Welcome to The Art of Growth. This is Jim Zartman, and today Joel Hubbard and I are going to talk about the downside of growth. Growth is a good thing, but it can come at a cost, and that's what we're going to talk about. We're discussing it and looking for it here, but we sent out a newsletter asking for your stories because your stories really do help us continue the conversation, because we do look at this as collaborative. That's why we do the panels we do. We are co-creating content with this community, and so we'd love to hear your stories. If you didn't get the newsletters about that the last couple weeks, you may want to go to theartofgrowth.org. Sign up for the newsletter again, because we did have a technical issue with our email list. So if you're not getting these, you might want to sign up, because there's a newsletter coming out this week that has a really important announcement in it. So you can sign up for the newsletter or take a free Enneagram test or Instincts test at theartofgrowth.org. And that's also the place to reach out to us about trainings for your organization and how we use the Enneagram to improve communication and conflict and trust on teams. But for now, let's go ahead and jump in with this conversation between Joel and I about the downside of growth.
So I had a conversation with a client who said, hey, I'm starting to grow. And these are the steps that he'd been taking. And I was super impressed. I mean, it was something that was very difficult for him to do, but he did it. And he was speaking up. He was saying how he thought or what he believed about things or what he expected or wanted for the first time, really. And this was with his family. And his family began to think and say this to each other and to him, like, is everything okay? Like, there's something wrong with you. And it was to the point that he felt like, I don't know that I can continue being this entrenched or this connected to my family at this level, where it feels like there's always this pulling me back to, being the one that just stays quiet and accepts everything and goes along with everything. And meanwhile, carrying all of this family drama, and it's affecting him. And I mean, even to the point of affecting his health. So again, it's something we've talked about before. Like, can you grow and change without it affecting those around you? And the answer is a resounding no. You can't. Not unless everybody else has been growing and they've been dying for you to grow, and then finally you start to grow. Well, then It's celebrated. But other than that, likely not going to be something that's going to be easy for you. And so we talked about, like, what is at stake in this decision. We played it out. Can you stay and can you communicate what's happening with humility and with openness? And will that be received? I mean, sometimes it's a guess, and oftentimes we're surprised by, hey, they did take it well and they are open to it. And I believe that in many cases would be the response you would get from family and friends.
Yeah.
But in other cases, that's not the way it goes. It's really like, we're confused by this. We don't like what's happening. We think that whatever you're doing, apparently you're being infected by some kind of growth disease, mental disease. Someone has put something in your mind that is causing you to behave differently, and it's not authentic to who you are. And so this is sort of like,
oh, they see it as a lack of authenticity.
Oh, they don't believe that that's, yeah. Yeah, oh yeah, very much so. In fact, to the degree that it was like, conspiracy thinking, like there's some, connection to, anyways, I don't want to go down that path because it'll reveal too many details, but you get the point. It's like,
right.
These are the extremes. People see it as like, there's something wrong. You've been infected by something. You need to return to who you were before, and others who will celebrate that growth if communicated to them. What I described to him was, I said, think about systems, and you're in a family system, and there's work systems, and there are religious systems, and there are political systems, and there are institutions of all kinds that all have systems. Everything where people gather together, there is a system that is formed, and we know this because what happens is when you first form as a brand new team or organization, everybody is trying to figure out and is anticipant of, like, what's my role? How do I fit in this system? And then pretty soon, it self-arranges and a system is formed. And we know that because if anything changes to that system, the system has a reaction to it. And it's the same thing with this family system. So it's an overarching thing under which you are one component of that, the other family member is another component of that, and so on. And whenever there's an anomaly, whenever there's something that shifts, and the system isn't rigid necessarily, it allows for a lot of variety.
Yeah.
Again, our predictive mind creates these models of what we expect from each other, and there is a range of responses. But when it's so far off of that, the system itself seeks homeostasis, so it is going to respond or react to that change. And the different individuals within that system will have to respond because the system wants that. Now, I say system as if it's its own entity. But those of us who've been in institutions know that that's actually a thing. When I was fired from a system, an institution, when I communicated with the individual, even board members, what was going on, individually, they said, we see it.
Yeah.
We see it. You're absolutely right. And it's wrong what's being done. They had the power to do something about it. But at the systemic level, meaning when they all got together, that was never going to happen. And they all sided together. And the thing that would cause the least amount of damage to the system, the least amount of disruption to the system, was me being let go. And so that was a surprise to me. And how many people remained in that system even after this happened and then shunned me as a result of that. It's like, we can't really have interaction with you because the system demanded the homeostasis and the return to that. Like, let's return to this comfortable space. Let's return to something familiar. So when people change, when people grow, and I'm not saying that's what happened to me, I think in many regards it was the right decision to make and by the leader, and I needed to go for sure. But for people who begin to grow, this is what's going to happen, is they're going to confront a system, and many times the system wants to return to what was before, and that's what causes disruption. And so to be aware of that, you can put it in the proper context rather than this is a personal moral deficiency on their part. It's more of like, well, understand that there's a disruption in the Force. It's sort of like a Star Wars thing. There's a disruption in the Force. It's something that has affected and we're all feeling it.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, important to have that before there's any sort of how do we move forward, is to understand that your change is not just your change. Again, we're a beehive. It's affecting everybody else. And sometimes that change is not great or not done well or done, which we're never going to do anything well when we first do it. So that's not a problem, but it does have an effect.
Yes. So what we're talking about today is we did an episode a while back. It's been a few years now, but it's still out there, called What to Do When You Want to Change and They Don't. So we're addressing this at the one-to-one level, and because there are relationships that struggle when one person starts to grow and change and the other person feels somewhat betrayed. They feel like, but you're not the person I knew anymore. Like we struggled with, where my own wife has said to me, like, you're just changing so fast. And it's like, you who I understand and know and I feel safe with, all of a sudden there's a lack of familiarity there and I don't know what it means. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times it's not even that it's a negative or it's a positive. It's just, I don't know what this means yet. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times we've talked about the downside of growth, and we were saying sometimes when people do grow, everyone else has wanted them to make that change. They're excited for them. They are happy for them, or they're skeptical, kind of like, well, did you really change? And so that still can be upsetting to the familiar. Mm-hmm. We're saying that systems have a sense of familiarity. That's how they function, because we've come together and there are rules in how we function. Mm-hmm. And so when someone breaks that in a really negative sense, so let's say, like, we've had this, and we've seen this with every family, right? So every family, they have like a somewhat secure structure, and then someone does something that's really destructive and it upsets the family. And now we're trying to figure out, like, well, these two people split up, and then now who goes to where with holidays, and how do we juggle this with the kids? And so when something negative can happen, we're familiar with that. Mm-hmm. And so we're trying to manage chaos sometimes in that situation. But there is a flip side when someone actually says, I'm not going to do this thing anymore that you've always wanted me to do, that actually creates a destructive thing too. And it's confusing. And why we're talking about this is because we know what happens when someone does something destructive in the family unit, and it causes a disruption that we now have to manage between the family members. But it's more confusing when you're like, I'm doing something positive, I'm growing, I'm not walking in the same patterns I've had that have had a negative effect on me, and I see as having a negative effect on others. And so I'm moving out of that pattern, but it's still a disruption. And so I think when this happens, the difference is there's an emotional surprise.
Yeah.
You're doing what now?
Yeah.
You're going to be saying what now? Like, we've had this happen with people who said, alcohol is no longer neutral for me. I need to no longer drink. And they go into sobriety, and their friends or family are like, well, can we invite him to this anymore? I don't know if I like that. Like, I don't even want to hang out with them now. Like, there's a disruption that happens when you leave a bad habit.
Yeah.
If you're no longer going to consume certain products, then you might be seen as being on the outside of the group. And I've seen people experience emotional pain of being rejected from their community because they no longer participated in a negative aspect that community was in, but they still wanted to be in community. And so there is this emotional surprise that happens when you feel like you're making good progress, and the reaction to it by the people closest to you is a lack of trust, more skepticism, more resistance. And that because they're surprised, they're like, I don't know what to do with you. And you who are growing and thinking you're doing something positive are like, am I now being rejected for a positive thing? And then you can even question it within yourself.
Yeah.
That's hard.
Yeah. I mean, it just brings to mind the different contexts, the many different contexts. You know, one that you mentioned is, you know, if you're with a group and you're used to all going out for drinks and, you know, partying and that kind of thing. Well, and then what happens when you decide, this is really good for me? Like, I'm noticing some things, and so I want to no longer do that. And the friend group rejects you. So that's one form, and that's painful. But, you know, what can you do? If you're going to grow, you could commit it to growth. One of the things I was coaching another client on this related to dating. Like, if you give up your own quest, your own reason for being here, the thing that you desire to put out into the world, and you're still always trying to figure that out. What is that exactly? But at least you have a sense of it. Like, I want to be involved in some kind of healing. So I want to maybe be a doctor or a physical therapist or something like that, because I love healing people. That's a thing that I'm drawn to. Well, you're drawn to that, but then you start dating and you might say to yourself, like, that's the focus, is I want to just find somebody. But if you give up the direction that you're going in for the sake of someone else, you're going to regret that down the road, and it's not even going to benefit the relationship, because then the attention is on the relationship only and itself at the sake of everything else, including your own sense of mission, purpose, whatever you want to call it. And I think that that's part of what has to be more clear in the minds of people is your growth cannot be an option. It's not something that you can table for a period of time.
Yeah.
The fixation on overworking on yourself, that needs to be tabled. That needs to sometimes take a break.
Yeah.
But as a mission to grow, for you, it's like, no, I'm wanting to put something good into the world. That has to be primary. And then the friendships and relationships, I believe, they're super important in all of our lives, but they have to be part of that quest, of that. What are you here to do? What is the thing that you want to put out into the world? You need to have that as that cannot be compromised. That doesn't mean it's rigid. That means it changes shape, it adapts because of the connections in the relationships. To my mind, you cannot do this in isolation. Like, I'm called to this, or this is I want to be a healer. I want to do something. I want to, maybe be an ophthalmologist or something else. Like, I love that whole field and I want to do this. But in your interactions with people, that sharpens that. That may sometimes shift and change that. What I'm saying is at a sort of values level, you can never compromise that value of personal growth and desire to put something out into the world that's good. And I think that that's going to cause sometimes disruptions in the relationships that don't always have to be disastrous.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because that's the flip side. Is I think sometimes I see a disastrous result because the people who are growing or see themselves as growing, if I can say that as gently as possible. Yes, sometimes they're growing. Sometimes they see themselves as now being further on than these people around them.
Yeah.
And I gotta say that because that's the flip side that's really ick. And they're like, well, now I've outgrown this person. I'm kind of beyond this person now. And they're just not keeping up. Like, that is not the same thing. That is not what we're talking about. That is more ego, not
yes, it is.
Leaving more of your ego behind, or your fixations or your patterns or your habits. Just want to make that little distinction. And now I can peacefully go on. But I had to say that. No, but what we're talking about is this entire thing, as far as like institutions' main goal is the preservation of the institution, right? So if you are part of a certain kinds of businesses, a church, a club, a community, a family, that family has organized itself in a certain way. There's a familiarity to how it functions, and it functions because there is familiarity. And then someone starts doing something that is even healthier. The institution is going to try and preserve itself. So it's good to be aware that we're trying to zoom out here and just say, like, you're trying to see the system for what it is. And all systems exist for their own preservation. They're all trying to protect themselves. Like, so you being in that church and saying, even in hindsight, you would say it was good. You should have been gone. You shouldn't have been there. You get that now. Even though all the people, when you talk to them individually, were saying, yeah, you're right about this issue or that issue. This is the thing. But there's still a way that those groups can evolve that is acceptable and tolerable by the people within the institution. And there is a rate at which it becomes really problematic, and it creates a stress on a system. So it's good to be aware that sometimes your growth, even if that is a non-negotiable for you in a good way, it can stretch the tolerances of your community. It is reasonable to expect some kind of response to that is not positive, because you are straining the edges of its capacity.
Yeah. Well, I think it might be helpful to define a little bit more what growth is, since you brought that little asterisk piece in there with growth. I think growth is sometimes viewed as a change of mind. A change of maybe a value shift or value change, and it certainly includes that for sure. But it may also be that growth is not. That may not be growth. That may be just a reaction to something. It's sort of maybe in a larger 60,000 foot view. Maybe it all is growth. Maybe even change of mind is part of that. And I do see some of my own, like, well, I no longer believe this, I think that. It's like a reaction to something, right? I was wounded by something that made me open my eyes. It's sort of like the Carl Jung thing where your eyes are open through wounding, and that is a necessary part of growth. So, your eyes are opened, you see differently, but that's not necessarily the only kind. If the focus is on reaction to something and you don't get past that, then that growth is pretty ugly growth. And I've been there, and I can see back at those days where we're like, well, no wonder people were really miffed and frustrated and struggled with me, because I'm not sure that was a healthy kind of growth. I think it was a reaction that eventually, yes, I did grow through it. But the awareness around what growth is, not that you've adopted a position and that means that's your growth. But that maybe for the first time you are thinking for yourself. Maybe for the first time you're emerging from groupthink to your own unique, how do I see things?
Yeah.
And that is growth. That moved. Not what you think, but the fact that you are now thinking for yourself. That would be growth. And that's what we would celebrate.
Yeah.
And I think you could apply this in many different ways, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, there's also practical habits, just things that you do differently. Like this, for me, I notice that I can do lots of micro addictions to lots of different things. And it makes me always exploring new things and going to here, going to that. So it's been important for me to start this pursuit of minimalism. And, in the last month, I got rid of several different things that I've had collections of that I've gotten rid of most of it. I cleaned out the basement, dropping certain hobbies. I'm like going through this process of trying to really sniper my life, like have it be super focused, like, because that's a desire. And so when you do this and you do, like, for instance, digital minimalism, and you're not interacting with people, and then there's this fear of like, I'm going to lose this, or I'm not going to have as much credibility or as much business or whatever if I'm not on the socials doing this, blah, blah, blah. If you streamline your family, you're like, well, we're not going to buy stuff. And when we do buy stuff, it's going to fit this certain criteria. And I think that as a family, like, we always think in upward mobility, and sometimes, living in a reasonably sized space and all this are some of the most responsible things you can do for the planet, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, this idea of a practice, it means that you're disrupting the way that the family has operated. When you're trying to tell grandparents and in-laws, we don't want presents. We don't want more things in our home. And we get rid of anything we don't use regularly. It creates this tension. And when you're new to developing a growth skill, you don't always know how to talk about it. And so they're asking questions that you don't really have great answers for yet. Mm-hmm. And so all of those things are stressing the people out around you. So if you stop a bad habit, or you decide to live differently, like every book that I've read so far on like minimalism, there's this point where other people in their life, it creates some kind of a tension. Like, you're not going to do what anymore? You're not going to, what? Like, I can't do.
Well, it feels like a judgment suit to them.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's a huge part of this. Like, you're not just upsetting the system. The system feels like you think you're above it. And I put the little asterisk because sometimes that's exactly what happens.
Sure.
And they're right.
Yeah.
They do act like they're above it. And it's like, I don't want to do that. And I'm not putting this on anyone else. It's just, this is a value that I have as far as how I want to live. And it disrupts Christmases and birthdays and holidays and travel plans, and even within the family unit, like, well, do we really need that? Does this fit the criteria? Like, what does it mean to live as intentionally as possible? What do you really care about? Like, is there a different way to have that? Like, I canceled several of our like subscriptions and stuff like that we've had for a while. And you're going, oh, this causes a certain level of disruption. And I think that's the whole thing, is like, a lot of times when you are prioritizing and valuing, you really look at your values and you start to live according to them, they are probably going to upset at least one of the systems you're in. Mm-hmm. That's the point that I'm making. And so I think it's good to expect that. And then when interacting about it, go back to the former concept of being, strong body, warm heart, flexible mind.
Yes.
And then you can navigate this a little better.
Well, here's some things I think that could be helpful to avoid when you're growing. Just imagine you going through this minimalist phase and you go, well, it's because everybody is just so consumptive, and we're
right
in the planet's getting warmer, and you go on this speech that you're giving. Right? You might think you are right as it can get.
And it might even be.
And you might even be right.
You're still a jerk.
Yeah, it's exactly. And I think that's the problem, is we're married to our ideologies rather than to the process of growth itself. The process of growth is like, oh, right, I'm starting to recognize how distracted I am by so many things.
Yeah.
That my life isn't really having the impact I'd like it to have. So that's the value. This is what I mean by, rather than the thing that you've locked onto, like, I want to be responsible, and I want to care for the earth, and I want to,
right.
Or I'm trying to be fiscally conservative or whatever.
Yeah.
These are not the thing. It's the thing is, you are doing something that you feel is aligning with a deeper value for you. And we're oftentimes afraid, or maybe we don't even know, but many times we're afraid to articulate that because in saying that, you don't come from a place of apparent strength. But remember, strength in body is not that apparent strength thing. It's more of the vulnerability of admitting you don't have all the answers. You don't always know why, but you think it's connected to this.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's this greater value of, I want to have a better impact on the world. If in fact things are happening this way in this world, I want to be helpful to that. And again, I might be wrong, but this is what I'd like to give my energies to.
Right.
And in doing so, I'll probably learn some things and tweak, and it'll probably look different 5 years from now. If you communicate it that way, most people, reasonable people, will go, well, at least he wasn't a dick about it.
Right.
You know what I mean? At least he wasn't being arrogant and talking down to us. It didn't feel that way. When you talk from a position of like, this is where I think I'm going, probably wrong in some ways, but
Right.
I have to move in that. So the strength in body is like, I'm choosing this course,
Right.
even if I'm wrong. But I think it's the best that I know at this point.
Well,
You
even
know?
when you were talking about it where a situation where you're like, well, I'm doing this thing because this, the planet's moving up and we have to do this, and we have to do that. And that's like putting it on someone else. And to me, that's like,
That's right. Yes.
that's the asterisk version I was trying to avoid, that's not growth. That's like, I'm above this now and you need to
Right.
be where I am.
Right.
Like, that's why when I said what I'm doing now with minimalism, I'm framing it as in like, these are my own addictions I'm trying to curb.
Yeah,
I'm
so much
putting it-
better. Yes.
I'm putting this on myself.
Yeah.
I'm not saying this is what you need to do. Like that, I'm trying to do certain things, criteria. There's certain things where Abby knows, like, you just can't have this food in the house. And if it's here, you have to hide it and dole it out because I will go from the bag is gone. Like there's certain kinds
Right.
of things. Like if I don't have an intentional direction of what to do with certain resources, then it'll just get consumed by the most recent
Sure.
obsession.
Yeah.
And I always have an obsession. And I was trying to explain this to my friends because so many of my friends, when it comes to addiction, they've had a very specific addiction in their life. I've never had a specific addiction. I can quit anything and I will immediately replace it with something
Oh,
else.
yeah. 100%.
I am a
Stimulation addict.
it's a
That's my thing.
I don't even know what it is. It's not exactly stimulation, but it's like, because people are saying, well, for instance, buying things doesn't make you feel better. I'm like, it doesn't bring happiness. I'm like, sure it does for a few minutes. That's all you're doing is you're trying to get temporary relief of pain.
Mhm.
And I think that's what it is more for me. It's like this temporary relief of pain.
Okay.
That is this pursuit. And I go into a million different addictions because of it. And so when I'm talking about my own growth or I'm trying to form better habits or whatever, sometimes it is the doing of things, which is really easy for me. And I've talked to other types about this. Certain types, to do something new, to take on a challenge and do something is really easy. And it's really hard to stop doing things. For others, it's really hard for them to start doing something new. So it's just different in how we're all wired. And so I've been explaining this to friends. You know how some people have like a diversification of their assets or their investments? Like I have a diversification of my addictions. Like this is how I do it. And so I need a holistic philosophy to kind of take on all of them. And so, but yes, that growth will disrupt certain things, but the goal is that I'm always trying to frame those things in the larger picture of the benefit to the whole. So I think it's really important when you're trying to talk about your growth and it is upsetting the system, you're constantly casting a vision of what you see as the long-term benefit of like, if I do this well, I know this is kind of hard or I know this is confusing for you, that I'm not just acquiescing like I was before, but I think it's actually for our benefit. I think in the big picture, this actually is helpful to who I am. And I do think it's helpful to you, who you are. And I'm happy to be curious about your perspective and your experience of it. What are your concerns here? To have that as much as possible while remaining strong in body and saying this is something I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, I think we lose the benefit of some really healthy habits by how we communicate and interact with them around others.
Yeah.
We're still too colonial or evangelical. We still like, I started this new diet, and so you all should be on this. Like, I'm like, don't like your eating habits now, or like whatever it can be.
Yeah.
But it can be very much like I'm trying to take over this aspect of your world. And that's not really growth, because real growth is example-led, not idealism-led.
Well, and it actually works too. And I think that's, I was talking to somebody about this, friend of mine, where I said, I'm kind of tired of the whole marketing, the over-marketing now that's happening in our world. Marketing every damn thing. It's like there's a marketer for everything out there. And I get to the point where it's like, you're all selling stuff. Everybody's selling stuff. Even, you think about religious institutions or political institutions or corporate institutions. Every one of them, they're selling something. It's like, I'm selling you this because it's a solution to something that you have, a problem that you have. But the thing is that we have such a short-term memory that we forget that didn't work the previous time, the previous 100 times. So why is it that we're still going to buy this next thing that we perceive is going to somehow solve our problems? And this happens in the world of therapy, where you're constantly being marketed as a new way of dealing with your current issues, At the end of the day, there's nothing that's really going to solve a lot of this for growth. You're going to have to chart your own course.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to grow in the way that terrifies you the most. And that growth is actually the thing that's going to produce real results. And when it produces real results, then you stand out from the rest of the world, but not in a way that is arrogant and that puts other people down. You might still get chopped down, but you're growing in a way that is humble and that it's inspiring to many other people who will want to follow that as well, because so they're not going to follow necessarily your way of growing, but you're demonstrating you need to walk your own path. You need to enter the hero's journey.
Yeah. And I think that's really what any of this does. That is the solution to me to the whole evangelical colonial thing of like, I'm doing this thing and you should do it too. The whole thing is like, and you should find your own path. You should walk your own hero's journey. Like that to me is when you're really reproducing something of value as opposed to you're trying to carbon copy my values onto you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great point, because that's really is the solution.
Well, and if you're not really grown and really not transformed, but you're in a position of authority and leadership, what do you have? All you have is like, you're going to tell people to do the thing that you're saying you should be doing.
Right.
But you yourself don't know that it actually works. So you are not.
Or it works for you, or you think it will work for you.
I don't think it actually works for them either.
I don't either, but I'm saying that's what they believe it will.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Or they're at the sociopathic level where then there's a reason why there's such a hunger for growth, and yet people are scrambling and looking for it everywhere. But at the same time, when you are confronted with what your path really is, it's terrifying, and very few people go there.
Yeah.
And I think that's the invitation that we're putting out there is, it's the hardest thing. So I tell my clients, it's the hardest thing you'll ever do, but it's also the most effective thing you'll ever do.
Yeah.
So and you will never feel more certain of that. Like the whole thing of certainty is, it's like, we're going to sell you something that, you will guarantee it'll work for you. And so you buy it. Of course, it doesn't work, but you forget. And the next time something is sold to you, buy it. The path to true growth, which is you have to confront your core, and we've talked about this before, the core fear of your type has to be confronted. And in the confrontation of that fear, there's this thing that's been talked about in Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey and many others predating him and after him, that you have to face it and you have to die to it, and then you experience a resurrection from that. The hero's journey is anything but certain, but yet it produces a deeper kind of certainty. It's not a certainty about everything in the future being lined up in exactly how you expect it, but there's a certainty that you're on the right path. I have felt that deeply, where I pursued certainty in the sense of the outcomes are all guaranteed,
right.
And that's what's marketable. That's what you sell. It's like, if you buy this product, you will guarantee to have this. If you buy this therapy thing, guaranteed to have that. You buy this, you're in this political position, you're guaranteed to have a better future for this country. If you're, so there's all these guarantees.
Yeah.
You're sold that way. But the hero's journey is the one that says, oh, you don't know. You don't know what you're entering into. But if you enter into it, you'll have the deepest sense of, this is the path, and I know it's the path. And I don't doubt that anymore.
Right.
Even though I don't know entirely where this thing is going to lead.
Is this why we're not good salesmen? Like, we don't know what's really going to help you. We got to go in and we've got to explore with you. We can't be like, if you follow these 5 steps, your team will function better. It's like, well, we know some things, some tools that will absolutely improve things if people get on board, if they'll actually be honest with themselves. Usually when we walk through this process, it's probably going to point out a couple of the problematic people on the team, and it's going to lead to some change up in the team. And but in the long run, it'll be better. I think one of the reasons we're terrible salespeople is because we're honest. We go, this is actually what it looks like. We believe the net, and we've experienced enough and seen enough to know the net positive when people go down the route. But to say, well, do this and then you're going to have this result, it's really hard to be authentic and to say that, because there is no such thing as a one size fits all.
Well, and the kind of outcomes that people are seeking, that's the problem. I tell people, I guarantee you will grow. There's no doubt in my mind, if you walk this path, which is tailored to your type, and I'll lay it out for them.
For sure.
This is what you have to do. It's going to be the hardest thing you'll do, but it'll be the most effective thing you'll do. But if your outcome is, I'm trying to figure out a way to manage this relationship, or to
manage
I'd like
some
to avoid
external thing.
Yeah, manage an external thing, or like the call I had this morning. I'd like to not feel inadequate. Okay, that's an outcome that you will get others that will sell you on stuff.
Yeah.
To improve your credibility, or to improve or to make you feel adequate, there's a lot of programs out there sold on those things.
Yeah.
Which I think, no, that's the wrong outcome. Right. That's entirely the wrong outcome. You will, if you have the right outcome in mind, which is, I want to grow through all 9 types, right? So for each type, it's like, I want to grow through this so that I confront the thing that scares me the most, and that through the confrontation of that, and through the thing that is mine to shine, and my light to shine in the world. So either direction, usually if the light is this is the light I'm meant to shine in the world, means I will have to confront this darkness. It's inevitable, right? Yeah. So let me put it practical. It's like if type 2 says, I really love to serve people. There's nothing that brings me greater joy than making connection happen in this world. And I fundamentally believe we need to be a more connected people. And for me, that is my deepest passion, is to create deeper connections, better connections in this world. And the way that it shows up for me as unique type 2 is, I want to run a company, this kind of company. This is where I want to see it happen and through. And I'm super passionate about this. Great. Now guess what you're going to have to do? You're going to have to confront your darkness. And the darkness that you're going to have to confront is, what happens if I'm not loved? What happens if I have to say something or do something that's going to cause people to walk away from me, people to dislike me? What happens if, in the process of my doing that, my own needs are never met? You're going to have to confront some darkness.
Yeah.
And it's inevitable.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. You're going to put your light out there. You're going to have to confront. That's your path. And there's no getting around this. There's no place there's nothing that you could be sold that's going to help you circumvent that path.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of tools that can help you engage that path. And there's a ton of tools out there that are wonderful that can help you engage that. Attachment styles, wonderful tool that can help you. But it's going to serve that trajectory, right? It's not going to replace that. It's not going to fix it's not going to fix your sense of inadequacy, your sense of fear. It's not going to fix it. But there are tools that can help you to engage and confront the darkness as you're moving towards shining your light. That's what I mean by growth. And I think if we're focused on that, we can do that with a lot of humility. Like, geez.
Well, it is a lot of humility to say to people around us, if they do feel any kind of disruption, like, can you give me some time with this?
Yes. Yeah.
Can you watch and see the result? And if you have some concerns, feel free to share them. I want to hear from you, and I want to do this as well as I can, because I'm not trying to leave everyone in the lurch or leave them behind as I go through this, but just watch and see if you see growth in me, see that I'm in a better place. Can you give me some time on that?
Mm-hmm.
So there are ways that we can communicate with humility from our own experience. Again, reflective listening skills, like all of the classic like communication skills that we've talked about elsewhere, that when you do this and you ask and you say, watch for a while, like, and make observations, see what you see, you're pulling some of that anxious energy out of the system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you're not giving it credibility. You're letting it die on the table instead of like feeding your own energy into it. No, I think I ought to do this, or I want to do this. I'm going to stand. Relax a little. Like,
Yeah.
None of us have arrived. None of us have it figured out. None of us really ever will. We're all guessing at our next best step, and communicate like that. And communicate like, I'm probably wrong about some of this, but I need to do this to figure it out, to find out. When you talk about things in that way, it brings the blood pressure down.
Yeah.
You're taking some of the anxiety out of the system. And I think when we're growing, we actually have a responsibility as an aspect of our growth to do that for the people around us.
Yeah, I believe that.
So thank you for listening, and we'd love you to add your story to the conversation. You can reach out to us at theartofgrowth.org. You can also follow us on Instagram at just Art of Growth. And the best way to help this show is to review us on iTunes or to share this episode with someone. If you'd like to go deeper with the Enneagram, you can sign up for the next round of certification beginning in January at theartofgrowth.org. And if you have any other questions, let us know. But for now, my friends, may you know that there is a price to growth, and it is an investment that is well worth it. At the beginning, sometimes you feel the loss and you feel the cost, but there is a compound interest waiting for you as you proceed, as you invest in your truest self, your deepest self, the one you are becoming. So may you catch glimpses of that person in the corner of your eye, and may that vision pull you forward today. Grace and growth, my friends.